Hello, I'm Dr. Amaleya Goneos-Malka. Welcome to Womanity, Woman in Unity, the show that celebrates prominent and ordinary African women's milestone achievements in their struggles for liberation, self-emancipation, human rights, democracy, racism, socioeconomic class division, and gender-based violence. Joining us today in Pretoria is Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, who is United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of UN Women. She's currently serving her second term in office. To give a little bit of context, from 2005 through to 2008, she was Deputy President of South Africa, overseeing programs to combat poverty and bring the advantages of a growing economy to the poor, with a particular focus on women. Prior to this role, she served as Minister of Minerals and Energy from 1999 through to 2005, and Deputy Minister in the Department of Trade and Industry from 1996 to 1999. She was a Member of Parliament from 1994 through to 1996 as part of South Africa's first democratic government. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's always a privilege to host someone like you who has truly lit the torch that lights the path for so many women, that makes their journeys easier in the future. To start with, I'd like to begin with your work in the UN. So UN Women is dedicated to gender equality and the empowerment of women. As a global champion of women and girls, UN Women supports UN member states to make the vision of Sustainable Development Goals a reality. And it stands behind women's participation in all aspects of life. And I understand that there are 5 key priority areas, from women leadership and participation, ending violence against women, engaging women in aspects of peace and security, enhancing women's economic empowerment, and making gender equality central towards national developing planning and budgeting. Could you share with us a few of the highlights and some of the work that's progressing in these various areas?
So, good evening, and to you and the people that will listen to us. In the area of leadership, which is quite key in all countries, because we don't have adequate representation of women in the private sector, in the public sector, in community institutions even. But for women who run for office, every country where there's an election, my team is on the ground. We're helping the women register. We're helping the women run. We're helping them rehearse even in front of the mirror to prepare to give the speech, but also to encourage them to go into parliament and to be focused on delivering and making a difference, so that women can, be in politics for a purpose. We also work at local government a lot. It's been exciting for us to see us increasing the number of women in local government in Pakistan, in India, in Afghanistan, countries that you wouldn't think, you would get this kind of we have more women in Pakistan in the National Assembly than in Congress in the US, so that's quite interesting.
I know, I think that's a very interesting dynamic, and it is one of my questions a little later. But
so, of course, we work on ending violence against women with a whole lot of other partners, because the issue is so complex, it's so difficult. We need everybody. I've decided to focus on working with men, actually. I'm UN Women who works with men, primarily because if men were to stop beating up women, case closed. But we actually need to encourage this kind of constructive masculinity, both from boys and from men, but also men in positions of authority, to use that authority to stand up for women. So in fighting violence against women, we focus on that. We help police academies around the world to train for prosecuting and preventing violence against women, and making sure that they know, how to deal with those cases. I don't know if we making as much inroad. I'm looking forward to be working with our minister here as well. And of course, we also work on women, peace and security. And sadly, that is the portfolio of our work that is growing because of the number of protracted conflicts around the world. So we are in Syria, we are in Iraq, we are in South Sudan, we are in DRC. We've just pulled out from Colombia, where we were there for a protracted time until the contract was there. And it is actually quite sad that now we are having to figure out how we deal with violence against women that is perpetuated by non-state parties in many of these conflicts. So there's no Rome Statute to talk about. There's no law enforcement that you could do. And because rape and sexual violence is now a weapon of war, women are actually part of the instruments and the arsenal that is actually used to fight war. We're seeing more girls becoming suicide bombers, so that's quite
it's a worrying change.
We work a lot on counter-terrorism as well, because again, and sadly, it's also an area of our work that is increasing. We work on women's economic empowerment, which is at least you get to do something nice, seeing women entrepreneurs who excel, who do work that helps you to celebrate talent and so on. But because our work tries to focus on where we can change systems, we also work with institutions in the economy. So we work with stock exchange to push them for their listing requirements, to ensure that they push for better representation of women by the companies that are domiciled in those stock exchange. We also work with chambers of commerce at every level to push them to do something more for themselves. And then we work with large companies. In terms of companies, for instance, the marketing and advertising companies, the big companies that do a lot of advertising and dominate in terms of what becomes the kind of image of a woman.
It perpetuates the image of a woman.
So we have formed with them an unstereotype alliance, where their responsibility is to focus on unstereotyping through the way they advertise and they market. And of course we work with member states, which is a challenging job, but 200 of them, it's quite yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing the breadth and depth of the work that is currently happening in UN Women. And I'm glad that you mentioned that your emphasis was also about looking at the male angle on the contributions that men and boys make in terms of combating gender inequalities. And under your watch, we've had the HeforShe campaign launch.
Yes.
There has also been Impact 10 by 10 by 10,
yes,
which I understand is a framework of government, institutions, and corporates. Could you please share how these came about?
HeforShe is a campaign, as a platform to enable men to come out as feminists and feel cool about it. That this is who I am, and I want to play a role in this movement for gender equality. And it is actually exciting because they come with such ideas, the kind of things that probably you and I would not think about. So here in South Africa, for instance, our HeforShe team works in taverns because, alcohol plays a significant role in violence against women. The Catholic Bishops' Conference has partnered with us, so they literally engage in shipping on the subject, and also make sure that their patrons in their communities report acts of violence. They actually go to court to accompany the victims if need be. We don't know which way this is going to go, but it is actually quite interesting because these are the most unlikely people that you'd want to work with. But the 10 by 10, where we work with heads of states, for instance, we encourage the head of state to choose an issue that is crucial for their country, that they will take personal responsibility for driving. For instance, the Prime Minister of Iceland is leading on equal pay. Iceland
doing
is
very well.
Yeah, they are the country that is strongest on gender equality, but they are not good on equal pay. They are not good on violence against women. They are not good on adequate participation. So but he just wants to dedicate himself on equal pay. President of Malawi is focusing on child marriage, the legislation, the implementation, the advocacy that goes with that. President of Indonesia focusing on trafficking and making sure that he takes it as his personal pet project to actually follow up and make sure. President of Japan focusing on women's economic empowerment. So we use also those role models in those communities and beyond, sometimes to be the voices where people will not necessarily engage with us in the same way, because we are the usual suspects. They expect me to say what I'm going to say, but if it comes from the President of Japan, then it's like, okay, why is he talking about this? And people, they pay more attention sometimes.
But it's a real paradigm shift, because the struggle traditionally in terms of going for equality has been women fighting for women.
But for me, I think apartheid taught me something. When we fought apartheid, it wasn't just us black people, just by ourselves. The struggle was inclusive, and part of being able to make the anti-apartheid struggle so global had to do with bringing everybody and allowing people to be active in their own right in the spaces that we're in. So I'm literally using the anti-apartheid playbook in trying to now apply it in the fight against gender equality.
Well, it sounds like it's working. People have risen to the challenge and are taking it on. In areas of leadership, and one of the things that you highlighted clearly was that we do not see enough penetration of women within the government space as well as the private sector. One of the things that I found is that legislation and quotas are sometimes used as interventions. They're not universally acceptable, but I challenge it by saying, if women aren't given a ticket to the game, how are they going to be players?
Well, also, I think for me, one of the most frustrating thing on leadership and participation in politics, for instance, where people have to vote, if you don't have a threshold that political parties have to enforce, every election you don't know what's going to happen. It is unsettling. You cannot actually consolidate a power base for women. So yes, some temporary measurement until such time that the stereotypes and the prejudice against women have changed. I think that's unnecessary. In one country, the women voted against having quotas, and they had like 15% of women in parliament. They went and we lost everything. It was heartbreaking. So
and why?
Well, they felt that they wanted to sort of like, that as in Ukraine, they wanted to fight on their own rights.
It just sets back that wheel that has been
and you have to start all over
forward
again, and people get really demoralized. Yeah.
But on the leadership aspect, I consider that when women occupy positions in government, when they've served as heads of state, that it's significant for several reasons, from demonstrating, one, the empowerment of women in governance, two, that women in these positions, as you said, they serve as role models for men and other women, and thirdly, having suitable gender representation is important for policy development as well as policy implementation. And in your experience, you were Deputy President of South Africa. In your current role, you're serving as United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of UN Women. Could you share some of your perspectives on this subject?
The majority of women, I find, who get into positions of authority do try to think about how can I make this not just work for me, but open doors for other women. Doesn't happen all the time, but I think it happens most of the time. But I think that it is important that everyone who is in a leadership position takes responsibility to be a leader for everybody and to open the doors for as many people as possible, for as many race, gender, abilities as possible, because you also don't want to have everything that will benefit women to depend on women. It's too much on women. And sometimes those that have authority, who just by a stroke of a pen can bring about changes, if we are not engaging with them, we are going to be banging the door all the time. So I think now I'm beginning to finesse the art of finding the open doors and just walking in through them, while obviously you continuously mobilize for banging off the doors, because that is still necessary in a number of ways. So I think for me, getting men to take responsibility in while I'm in this job is my biggest thing, because it's a big constituency to ignore. I feel feminists of my generation, we wasted a lot of time being angry at men and not bringing them along. But also we have to be careful that when they come along, we don't treat them as special peoples, because it is their responsibility to be there for humanity at all its best, because that also could send a different message. So it's a nice one. It's not a popular choice. By the way, there's a lot of feminists who feel, give me a break. Those guys, but there's some nice guys like the ones in this room. So we have to.
But we have to have an inclusive
and you have to start
society.
early. Orientation. We absolutely, because at the age of 6 already girls begin to think that they are no good, that there are things that boys can do that they can't do, which is devastating in this day and age.
But that puts a big onus, I would say, on parents,
yeah.
particularly mothers, who are
absolutely.
bringing them up and showing them the way.
Yeah.
Whilst we're on the leadership topic, building female leadership capacity is incredibly important for the future of women across the globe. But yet we see still too few female heads of state.
For Africa, for instance, we have formed a network called the African Women Leadership Network. And we are wanting to make sure that we will have a chapter in every country in Africa. We are now having some presence in 34 countries. And the idea is exactly to mobilize as many women as possible to avail themselves for leadership position, but also to stay in solidarity with each other, to make the issues visible, and to also focus on reforms in the spaces where discriminating women has been normalized, because no one ever asks. So in most of the countries that we're in, I never leave a country without going to meet the Electoral Commission just to check what's up. How do you work with men? Because in many countries also we have a lot of violence against women who run for office, making sure that they've got the measures to address that, trying to understand that the way the rules work in that country, they do not prejudice women, and of course always encouraging consideration for some form of quota if one doesn't exist. If it exists, thanking them profusely for having it.